OPPD is proud to play an important part of keeping communities powered and thriving. As our region continues to grow and evolve, so must our energy portfolio. Through research and planning, we are defining solutions to meet the energy challenges of tomorrow. Our Pathways to Decarbonization initiative is part of our commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while supporting our growing communities, and it will help us take the next step towards achieving our goal of net zero carbon production by 2050. To achieve this goal, we're focused on 4 distinct projects. These projects will guide us towards our net zero carbon goal while we remain focused on energy reliability, resiliency, and affordability. The Energy Portfolio project is focused on reducing OPPD's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, our energy portfolio. This project will evaluate a broad range of technologies to develop potential pathways for OPPD to meet our net zero carbon goal while ensuring electric system reliability and minimizing cost. The study is broad and high level and will provide support and guidance for future decisions by the district, but it will not make specific recommendations on retirement dates or siting of resources. The Energy Portfolio project is a big undertaking, so we're taking the time to do it right. In April, we held the first of several public workshops where we shared an overview of our approach and what's anticipated for the remainder of 2021. We'll explain each phase in more detail in a moment. And we introduced you to Energy and Environmental Economics, or E3, an energy consultant who is helping guide the process. But what is decarbonization exactly? Merriam-Webster defines decarbonize as a verb meaning to remove carbon from, which we could probably reason just from looking at the word. But more specifically, decarbonization is the process of reducing carbon dioxide emissions caused by the widespread use of fossil fuels and the transition to using other low-carbon resources like solar, wind, biofuels, hydrogen, and energy storage that together result in a reduced output of greenhouse gases and a smaller impact on the Earth's atmosphere. In a nutshell, decarbonization is the process of moving away from fossil fuels and toward cleaner, more efficient, sustainable energy sources. E3 explained the 4 aspects of decarbonization necessary to meet long-term goals: energy efficiency and conservation, electrification, which considers the wide use of energy by industrial, agricultural, business, and residential customers and their combined demand and impact on the environment, the use of low-carbon electricity, and low-carbon fuels. Our second workshop focused on multi-sector modeling to help us understand and forecast how energy demand may change as the broader economy also decarbonizes. Shifting energy demand will impact both how much and when OPPD will need to supply power to customers, and is an important consideration as we plan for a net zero carbon portfolio. Having accessible low-carbon electricity is critical to decarbonization. In addition to OPPD's efforts to use and produce low-carbon electricity, other sectors must make changes too. When all energy users, not just OPPD customers, reduce carbon emissions, then our communities and global economy will be more successful in the transition away from fossil fuels. All sectors of the economy, including buildings, both residential and commercial, industry, transportation systems, agriculture, and electricity, must undergo transformation. Fundamental change is necessary to achieve community-wide decarbonization. Let's talk about electric vehicles. While they move us away from fossil fuels, they still require energy to operate. As more and more electric vehicles hit the road, we need more clean energy sources to power them. The same holds true for buildings that must be designed efficiently and pivot away from natural gas heating as their primary heating source. Even with these changes, The role of alternative low-carbon fuels like biofuels, natural gas, and hydrogen should not be overlooked. They still have a role in decarbonization, and they will continue to fuel things like airplanes and heavy equipment that won't transition as quickly as our cars and transit systems. We must consider the community-wide impact of decarbonization on the electric system as a whole. We know that electricity demand will literally drive when and how electricity is used. As demand increases, so does the imperative for reliability. As other sectors of our economy also work towards decarbonization, and as the population and economy continue to grow, OPPD is forecasting energy demand and growth that exceeds demand 150% by 2050. To do our part to support all sectors, we're focused on a balanced scenario with multiple ways to get to decarbonization. The scenario that relies on a combination of electrification and decarbonized fuels is also the most cost-effective. The balanced scenario assumes that in the future, there will be a significant increase in electric vehicle adoption, that building heat will primarily be provided by electric heat pumps with natural gas backup, that industry will transition to a combination of electricity, hydrogen, and carbon capture and storage, and about 15% of the remaining total economy-wide emissions will be offset by negative emission technologies that actually remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. When we put these assumptions into the balanced scenario model, we see a shift in the peak demand for electricity. Today, peak demand occurs on hot summer days when high temperatures mean more demand for air conditioning. In the future, cold winter days may also increase demand as building heat transitions to electric heat pumps. While we expect winter demand is still less than during summer, this shift results in peak electricity demand that more than doubles what it is today, from 2.5 gigawatts to 5 gigawatts. Serving this sizable increase in electricity demand while working towards a decarbonized future makes OPPD's commitment to reliable, resilient, and affordable power more important than ever. At our third workshop, we reviewed the technologies we're considering, their performance, and associated costs, as well as fuel forecasting and modeling scenarios. As we consider and anticipate other sectors also making efforts to decarbonize, we assume and include energy efficiency into our modeling. And while widespread electrification will increase electric demand, there is an upside. Appliances and electric vehicles will require less energy to operate. So, even as electrification increases, energy use remains relatively unchanged or even slightly reduced due to increased efficiencies. Consider your personal vehicle. As more people buy electric cars, that reduces the reliance on fossil fuels and reduces emissions. While electric vehicles add to the demand for electricity and require infrastructure updates, they are much more efficient in reducing emissions, like 3 to 4 times more than conventional gas-powered cars. So the net outcome is realized as energy that is never used or considered to be low carbon. Efficiencies can also be gained through programs that promote low-energy light bulbs, more insulation, or thermostat controls. This phenomenon multiplied for widespread use contributes to community-wide decarbonization, making energy efficiency a key assumption with considerable impact. To support the increased transition to more energy efficiency and the demand growth for electrification, OPPD identified, studied, and considered over 150 existing and future or emerging energy production technologies for its energy portfolio. This research included options for OPPD's existing power generation assets, as well as those that are planned or coming online through Power with Purpose initiatives. Considerations included leaving existing assets in place or converting existing assets to utilize other fuel sources, like coal to natural gas, oil to biofuels, or natural gas to hydrogen, And finally, the possibility of someday retiring some power generation assets. Our existing and planned assets are integral elements of our energy portfolio as we transition to net zero carbon production by 2050. OPPD has determined carbon capture and sequestration will not be considered for coal-fueled power generation assets due to its significantly high cost, increased volumes of CO2 needed to sequester, and the lack of feasible physical geological formations necessary for sequestration in our service territory. We will, however, continue to consider carbon capture and sequestration for natural gas-fueled power generation assets since capture volumes are much lower for gas and the technologies are more manageable. Other potential energy production technologies we sorted and grouped. If a technology wasn't feasible, like carbon capture and sequestration of coal, it was withdrawn from consideration. Experimental technologies were also withdrawn. More suitable technologies were categorized based on cost, feasibility, and level of decarbonization. Technologies were then assigned a level of maturity or performance history ranging from mature to emerging or experimental. Each technology category, or combinations of technology categories, were explored further by modeling scenarios to support decarbonization. These assumptions and technology categories provided the basis to begin modeling. Scenarios were analyzed by their mix of generation technologies and also by how fast they achieved decarbonization or how quickly a scenario could potentially reach OPPD's goal of net zero carbon production. The Energy Portfolio Project modeled 19 scenarios, which represent 18 different portfolio mix options, combined with 18 different available technologies and one reference scenario, which assumes no greenhouse gas reductions, to serve as a baseline. Analysis focused on reliability, resiliency, portfolio optimization, and risk. In our fourth workshop, we focused on the technical aspects of scenario modeling and how it all fits together to map our pathways to decarbonization. The question we're working to solve is not if OPPD will pursue net zero carbon production, but rather how we can define an energy portfolio that is environmentally sensitive, reliable, and affordable for our customers. The future is uncertain, and we may not have all the answers today. So our energy portfolio must be flexible and able to adapt to an ever-changing energy industry, customer preferences, and power generation technologies. Each scenario is analyzed for how quickly it will help OPPD reach the net zero goal, therein satisfying the need for environmental sensitivity. Next, each scenario is analyzed for reliability and resiliency. That measures OPPD's ability to keep the lights on and keep them on during expected and unexpected extreme conditions, like severe weather or energy grid disruptions. For this analysis, we must determine resource adequacy. That is, if there's enough of a resource available to meet electricity demand in a given scenario. Insufficient resources can cause unexpected brownouts or blackouts. We call this a loss of load event, and it occurs when the total electricity demand is higher than the available resources capacity. When the energy grid cannot support demand, it can result in brownout or blackout conditions across the system. By ensuring resource adequacy, loss of load events are less likely, if ever, to occur. The goal is to keep potential planned and unplanned outages to a minimum. To meet resource adequacy, we have to plan for peak demand and a bit more for buffer or a reserve margin. Traditional resources like coal, nuclear, and natural gas are better at accommodating resource adequacy because they can generate power at any time of day, during any season, for as long as needed. Planning for demand and reserve margins with these resources is straightforward. However, when we think about planning for demand and reserve margins for zero carbon resources like wind, solar, and energy storage, it gets more complicated. Think about your energy use after kids come home from school and you get home from work. While the sun begins to set, you still need electricity to cook dinner, watch TV, power lights and computers for homework, or heat water at bath time. You'll likely also need to plug in your electric vehicle. It gets trickier to plan renewable resources to fully meet peak demands. The same is true for wind and energy storage. That's why we have to plan for a mix of power generation resources and supportive infrastructure to meet resource adequacy. Renewable resources have better potential to meet peak demands when combined together, like wind plus solar, or solar plus storage, rather than just wind, just solar, or storage alone. To illustrate this, let's take a hypothetical look at the polar vortex outages that occurred across the Midwest from February 3rd through the 15th of 2021. If we look at the actual electricity demand for those bitterly cold days, paired with scaled actual solar and wind production available during the same time frame, which is significantly more than is currently installed on the electric system, we can easily analyze for resource adequacy during an unexpected, extreme weather event. For the first 4 days, nearly 100% of electricity demand could have been met through a combination of wind, solar, and energy storage resources. However, as the event continued, we see that energy demand steadily increased, despite pleas from the utilities for customers to curb energy use and alleviate excessive demand. It was so cold outside, electricity was needed to heat homes and buildings for people, pets, and livestock to stay warm, and to avoid freezing, bursting water pipes. In this real-world event, electricity demand increased while production from renewables decreased, creating a gap. The lesson here is that no generation resource, traditional or renewable, is perfect, especially when Mother Nature throws a curveball. It also illustrates the importance of resource adequacy analysis as we model OPPD's potential power generation scenarios for the future. We must find a mix of power generation sources that is reliable and resilient through an event like the February 2021 polar vortex. To do that, we look at effective load carrying capability of different resources. This measures loss of load probabilities and accounts for diminishing reliability contributions of resources, but it also captures the benefit of mixing generation resources. OPPD's service territory is located within the Southwest Power Pool, or SPP. SPP determines the effective load carrying ability standards to measure renewable resources, which is key to our evaluation and demand responsiveness. Another aspect we consider is operational reliability and essential reliability services, meaning, are available resources capable of keeping the lights on? Are they able to ramp up or down to meet demand? Also, we need to consider the transmission system that distributes electricity while meeting both regional and national requirements. We also look at resiliency to ensure our system is prepared and can withstand, as well as recover from, high-impact events like tornadoes, a polar vortex, possible fuel supply chain interruptions, or even a national security attack on our electrical grid. While there is not a specific standard or measure for resiliency, we can learn from past events and assess how a proposed set of power generation resources would perform. We then look for ways to improve resiliency during those high-impact events. That could include both infrastructure improvements and resource modifications. Following analysis, we run an optimization model to select portfolios that meet environmental greenhouse gas reduction targets by 2050 or sooner and ensure resource adequacy requirements while minimizing cost. In short, OPPD selected portfolios will be environmentally sensitive, reliable, and affordable. The model will also identify optimal power generation resources, how much of those resources are needed, when resources should be built, and the total cost of the system needed to achieve our goal of net zero carbon production by 2050. Modeling activities also go beyond OPPD's footprint to determine how our plans will work with the Southwest Power Pool. We'll evaluate other SPP member portfolios and how they are changing to meet net zero carbon goals, which will affect and contribute to the buying, selling, and exchange of electricity resources throughout the region. Though SPP members can trade and support each other's electricity demands, it's important to maintain perspective and avoid risk that may arise from too much interdependence. While OPPD is a contributing member of the Southwest Power Pool, we must independently support the demands of our service area first and foremost. Further risk modeling will account for uncertainties, like the availability of identified technologies, variable fuel and resource costs, or the possibility of new government regulations regarding carbon emissions. In October, we held our 5th workshop, focusing on the initial energy portfolio modeling results. We explained that achieving net zero carbon emissions will require a significant transformation in both how OPPD generates electricity and how our customers consume energy. Listening to stakeholder feedback in prior workshops, our modeling and energy portfolio optimization scenarios considered both net zero carbon and absolute zero carbon options. Net zero carbon scenarios allow OPPD to buy, sell, and exchange electricity resources with other entities in the Southwest Power Pool to meet generation needs. Absolute zero carbon scenarios rely solely on electricity generated by OPPD assets. We considered the pace of decarbonization. While our goal is net zero carbon production by 2050, we also included scenarios that would achieve this goal at a more accelerated pace by 2035. And we were open to a wide range of available technologies, including mature technologies like wind, solar, and battery storage, as well as emerging technologies that may become scalable and more cost-effective in the future, such as long-duration storage and hydrogen. And finally, we accounted for sensitivities that may have affected the modeling results, like demand growth, resource mix of the Southwest Power Pool, carbon pricing, technology costs, load flexibility, and hydrogen availability. All in all, our modeling relied on the best available, most widely used industry standard methods and data sources. We cannot emphasize enough, every portfolio scenario we studied requires a significant amount of economy-wide energy efficiency to reach our net zero carbon goal. Our model assumes that our customers will improve energy efficiency by 2050. Some of this will be achieved through continued investments in energy-efficient appliances and building upgrades. Other efficiency improvements will be realized through beneficial electrification, such as community-wide conversion to electric vehicles and electric heat pumps. But with this beneficial electrification comes substantial load growth over the next 30 years. To accommodate this growth, while meeting our net zero carbon goal, OPPD will need to increase the capacity of solar and wind assets from around 1 gigawatt to over 12 gigawatts by 2050. These new carbon-free renewable assets supply the vast majority of energy. However, some firm generation resources, like natural gas, will still be necessary for resource adequacy and to meet system reliability needs. Across all net zero carbon scenarios, OPPD will eventually convert our remaining coal-powered plants to natural gas. The timing of this varies by scenario, taking place sometime between 2030 and 2045. Our modeling results also assume that other existing natural gas assets would have the ability to utilize low or zero carbon fuels, such as green hydrogen or biofuel. In total, OPPD would need an additional 1 gigawatt of firm power generation capacity by 2050 to support the continued integration of renewable energy assets. These assets play an important role to ensuring heating systems and lights reliably stay on, even in the harshest of weather conditions, and is also the industry standard or best practice for resource adequacy, reliability, and resiliency. To illustrate how renewable energy and firm resources, such as natural gas, work together to deliver low-carbon, reliable electricity, we tested it against actual historical weather conditions from 2017. The series of bars shown here represent 52 weeks of the year. Each individual bar shows the amount of generated capacity in gigawatts for each available resource. Blue represents wind, orange represents solar, red is oversupply or excess generation, and gray represents the need for firm backup capacity. When looking at a specific week in the fall, where the black line represents OPPD's load, the selected net zero carbon scenario provides sufficient capacity, and even more. The excess can be saved in battery storage for later use, shown in green, and the remainder, shown in red, can be exported and sold to our energy partners in the Southwest Power Pool or others connected to the nationwide electricity grid. Looking at another week in the winter, modeling shows that even with large quantities of renewable capacity, renewable resources alone would be unable to meet the demand load. However, firm dispatchable capacity is able to adequately accommodate the load. This real-life example illustrates how renewable energy resources, like solar and wind, combined with battery storage and minimal use of backup generation, can work together to deliver reliable and resilient net zero carbon electricity. Shifting now to the pace of decarbonization, where we explored multiple timelines for implementation. Our modeling included 2050 aligned with our net zero carbon reduction goal, as well as an accelerated pathway of 2035 to achieve deep emission reduction sooner. We found that regardless of the pace of decarbonization, the optimal portfolio of generation assets was the same. Accelerating decarbonization would require a quicker adoption, acquisition, and implementation of wind, solar, and battery storage assets. Doing so would result in less total greenhouse gas emissions, but would come at a slightly higher cost and require large quantities of near-term renewable resource additions. Implementation over a longer time frame provides the opportunity to take advantage of potential emerging technologies, but produces more cumulative emissions. The pace of beneficial electrification also impacts projected load sensitivities. If electrification occurs more rapidly, then implementation of renewable and firm capacity assets must occur simultaneously to support the additional energy demand. Switching gears now, we considered the pros and cons of absolute zero carbon scenarios, where OPPD can only build non-emitting resources and cannot take advantage of negative emissions technologies or credits. In these absolute zero carbon portfolio scenarios, current commercialized mature resources like wind, solar, and battery storage would still provide significant energy generation. However, firm capacity generation would be fueled by alternate fuels, such as hydrogen or advanced nuclear, to meet load demand during extreme conditions. The estimated cost of hydrogen fuel is expensive, multiple times more than natural gas. Nuclear is even more expensive. The alternative is to forego the firm capacity assets and rely only on renewable and energy storage assets, thereby needing significantly more assets to accommodate demand in all conditions, which in turn also significantly increases implementation costs. In either case, the absolute zero carbon scenarios increase costs significantly over net zero scenarios, doubling overall costs. Absolute zero carbon scenarios also require unproven, emerging technologies to be viable. And finally, by 2050, there's no additional realized greenhouse gas benefit resulting from absolute zero carbon scenarios instead of net zero scenarios. Since we will be adding solar and wind assets to any selected portfolio, we also consider direct and indirect land use impacts. Direct land use includes the space needed for wind turbine foundation pads or solar arrays. Indirect land use refers to the total development footprint, including the area between wind turbines and each row of solar panels. While the indirect land use for wind turbines is significantly more than solar panels, that land can still be used as productive farm or ranch lands. Our modeling projects around 1.1% of land within Nebraska would need to be dedicated for wind and solar assets to achieve our net zero carbon goal. All of these sensitivities were included in our optimization and modeling scenarios. Our final workshop in December focused on risk and resilience analyses of the final modeling results, identifying the optimal energy portfolio options to meet OPPD's net zero carbon production goals by the year 2050. Building off the optimized portfolio scenarios shared in Workshop 5, we completed a risk analysis. Our approach to evaluating energy planning risk considers variable or uncertain fuel prices, variable or uncertain environmental regulations, and potential taxes or fees on carbon emissions. Fortunately, a decarbonized portfolio presents less risk exposure to each of these considerations. However, we have identified a risk associated with near-term implementation of existing renewable energy generation technologies. With the potential for technology to advance and cost to decrease, OPPD may not realize the full benefit of these improvements due to being heavily invested in other assets using comparatively older technology. With this in mind, our risk analysis focused on the least regret additions of new technologies. We narrowed in on identifying commonalities across all scenarios. For example, solar is a low-risk investment with robust build-out, even across the least optimal portfolio scenarios. Similarly, the amount of additional wind assets needed across optimal portfolio scenarios is robust, but also relatively constant, making it a low-risk investment for OPPD. And we saw more of the same with battery storage, where the projected build-out was robust across all portfolio scenarios, also making it a low-risk investment. Though firm capacity fueled by hydrogen, natural gas, or biogas is not allowed in all the absolute zero scenarios, it plays a critical role in optimal net zero portfolio scenarios, therefore also making it a low risk among these options. Nuclear, which was not economic in the majority of our portfolio scenarios, carries more risk in the absolute zero portfolios where it was included. Additionally, our analysis looked at load growth as a potential risk, from projected lows to projected highs. While load growth does have associated uncertainties, there is less risk involved with technology evolution because OPPD has the ability to adapt, accelerate, or moderate new asset implementation to meet load growth demands. Following the risk analysis, we looked closer at the generation portfolio scenarios and how they performed facing resiliency challenges, which included extreme weather conditions like extended low wind and solar output, where we see peak demand challenges requiring backup capacity in summer and autumn months in the years between now and 2030. However, peak demand transitions to the colder winter months by 2050 when generation is almost fully dependent upon renewable resources. Extreme summer heat, where we experience heat waves lasting at least 4 continuous days. In high renewable producing weeks, demand challenges are easily met, but in low renewable weeks, with little wind output, resiliency must be met with firm dispatchable capacity to meet peak demands. This holds true even when we assume temperature increases caused by climate change. During extreme winter cold or polar vortexes, again, in high renewable producing weeks, demand challenges are easily met, but in lower renewable weeks, with little wind and solar, resiliency must be provided by firm dispatchable capacity to meet peak demands. However, when we factored in startup failures or fuel supply disruptions, the modeling triggered potential resiliency and reliability challenges for a few hours, occurring during overnight hours. To mitigate these challenges, added measures would be required, which might include having additional fuel available on site, winterizing the fuel delivery infrastructure, and investing in wind turbine de-icing technology. And finally, during extreme local weather events like flooding or tornadoes, meeting resiliency challenges are dependent on OPPD's partnerships with other regional utilities, primarily within the Southwest Power Pool, to help provide adequate generation and secure reliable generation resources to meet peak demand. Over the past year and a half, our Pathways to Decarbonization team worked collaboratively to identify optimal energy portfolio scenarios to reach our net zero carbon production goal by 2050. Our final analysis arrived at these key findings. 1. OPPD can achieve net zero carbon production while balancing affordability and reliability. Transformational changes to energy generation is achievable with relatively moderate cost impacts. Decarbonization portfolios have a modeled cost increase of approximately 10 to 20% over time by the year 2050, while maintaining resource adequacy levels. 2. Ceasing coal generation and reduced fossil generation is projected in all net zero scenarios, both of which will be replaced with low-carbon resources. All scenarios ultimately repower or retire OPPD's coal generation facilities by 2050. 3. A mix of new, low-carbon resources, including renewable energy, energy storage, and community-wide energy electrification will be required. Large quantities of low-carbon resources are required to eliminate fossil fuel generation and reduce emissions across OPPD's system. 4. Reliable generation is needed to maintain resource adequacy. Wind, solar, energy storage, and demand-side resources support reliability but have limitations, especially during extreme weather events. Firm dispatchable resources are required to support the system during these critical periods. 5. Resources are consistent across a variety of pathways. A core set of resources are common across a variety of scenarios. Pace of decarbonization scenarios sets the speed of resource decisions, and solutions scale proportionately with total load. 6. Absolute zero emission scenarios are substantially higher in cost and are dependent on future technology development. Achieving absolute zero with current technology requires impractically high levels of new resources at significantly higher cost. However, emerging technologies such as hydrogen, long-duration storage, and small modular reactors have the potential to make this more feasible. 7. Accelerating decarbonization reduces emissions at a relatively low incremental cost, but poses implementation and integration challenges. Accelerating net zero decarbonization pathways results in relatively low incremental cost, but requires integrating higher levels of resources in the near term, which may pose supply chain, financial, grid interconnection, and operational risks. 8. The changing resource mix will pose new resiliency challenges that must be evaluated, understood, and mitigated. Critical resource adequacy periods are expected to change from peak summer conditions to periods of extreme cold or extended periods of low renewable generation. Grid resiliency will depend on how utilities anticipate and prepare for these extreme events as the grid continues to evolve. The steps we've taken with our Pathways to Decarbonization-Energy Portfolio study surpasses all prior work OPPD has done to understand the changes needed to meet our goal of net zero carbon production by 2050. We've identified actionable pathways to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our portfolio, while still maintaining energy reliability, resiliency, and affordability. Throughout this journey, we've shared our findings with OPPD leadership, its board of directors, and you, the public. Our findings from the Pathways to Decarbonization-Energy Portfolio study will shape OPPD's Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP, which gets filed with the Western Area Power Administration every 5 years and is due in February 2022. As always, we appreciate your time and interest throughout this investigative process. Your participation and engagement resulted in a stronger Pathways to Decarbonization-Energy Portfolio study that reflects our community's needs and concerns. We're continually looking for long-term solutions that allow us to be your energy partner and help our region thrive. We are committed to providing reliable, sustainable, and affordable results to build a brighter future.